Welcome to another episode of Make Mental Health Matter with a theme on Mondays as Mental Health Mondays. I talk to guests who are either experts in the mental health space, advocates of mental health, or those that live with or experience a mental health challenge. And as a reminder, if this is your first time watching this, and you're watching it via YouTube or any of the TV streaming platforms, make sure you mash down that subscribe button or add us to your favorites list or watch list or whatever they call it so that you don't miss another episode of Make Mental Health Matter. I promise you, every single guest that I have on every single week is just incredible. And really, the whole goal of Mondays is bringing resources to you as our audience centered around whether it's mental health, mindset, wellness, really ways to be able to help you as our audience members. And then we also go live on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. with the theme of Warrior Wednesdays. And that's really showcasing the stories of whether it's trauma or whatever somebody went through to that point of hope. And again, if this is your first time watching, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Kelli Melissa Reinhart. I am the host of Make Mental Health Matter. We go live on Mondays at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time and Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Mountain Standard. Well, I think it's Mountain Daylight Time right now. Daylight savings, that thing. But without further ado, I am going to bring up my guest for today. Laura, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Kelli. Thank you so much for inviting me on here. I'm super excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So my name is Laura Silverstein, and I am a couples therapist, and I've been doing this work for about 30 years. And right now, my mission is really to share what I know with as many people as possible at this sort of phase in my career. There has been a huge issue with the past 2 years with accessibility for mental health practitioners, just because of COVID and the mental health crisis. And so a lot of what I'm really working to try to do is to provide more and more resources that are available for people who maybe don't have access or maybe don't even need, professional private couples therapy with a specialist. So I try to share all of the things that you can take out of couples therapy, like the communication skills and general information and education, hoping that just more and more people can feel loved, feel lovable, and just be in healthier, happier relationships.
Yeah, I mean, that's just relationships in general, I think are really, really important, but having that key piece of happiness and the accessibility to resources. I'm like, come on, word. But I think that what you said right at first is that we do have enough resources, but sometimes we don't know what ones are out there. And
Right.
the accessibility to those sometimes can be challenging. So that's why I love bringing on people like you to be able to just showcase to our audience what is out there and available. And maybe sometimes there are waiting lists, sometimes there's not. But I think the important part is giving access to those resources and the tools that I know you will be able to provide as we talk through this. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on. And so I'm curious, I love to hear the backstory. What really got you into this work?
So I think I'm one of those really lucky people who knows what I want to do very early in my life. I think that part of it is how I was raised in terms of just, my parents always really giving me the message that I can make a difference in the world. And I've never like shied away from intense emotion. You know, some people really don't like conflict, and it's not that I love conflict, but I have never liked small talk. I'm the kind of person that if I meet you, I want to like sit down in a corner and really get to know you. I don't want to talk about the weather. I want to find out who you are and what's your story and what's interesting about you and your life. And for me, I think that was a very natural progression into wanting to be a therapist, because I'm now in a role where that's part of what I do every single day is it's not like socially inappropriate for me to ask people deep questions and get to know, you know, how are you actually, which I always think is just how we connect and feel close. So yeah, so when I was young, I definitely, you know, before I even knew what a therapist was, I found an old journal. Like my mom brought me a bin of old stuff, and it was like, you know, what do you want to be with when you grow up? And I was like, I don't want to be a guidance counselor, but I want to be somebody that just talks to people about their feelings. And I knew that I didn't want to do bulletin boards. So, you know, that's a lot of artwork, and I'm not so good at that part.
That's amazing. I mean, I think about when I was younger, my mom was a teacher, and
Uh-huh.
that was something that I thought about doing. And then as I got older, I was like, I don't really want to be a teacher. And then interestingly enough, I mean, I teach people now.
Yeah,
And so
100%.
get a little bit of that, but
Yeah,
that's really interesting that even as a young child, you're like, I want to, talk to people and help
right.
them. And that's cool. That's awesome.
Yep. Yep. And my mom was a teacher too, by the way. And so I think that, I think when you grow up in an environment where, you know, you just sort of are thinking about other people and being in the world to kind of help other people out, um, that's sort of the tone that I grew up with. And I
Definitely.
started off, I wanted to work with kids, and I started as a family therapist. That's what brought me down to Philadelphia, because there's a very famous child family therapy training center here. So I came down to train in that. And the more I did family therapy, the more I realized that I felt like it was the parents who really would benefit from having somebody really listen to them and figure out how they can talk to each other and get on the same page, so that they could be there for their kids. So it's been interesting to see that progression over time.
Yeah, that's interesting also. I mean, I for whatever reason with my nonprofit, I keep getting drawn back to that youth demographic, really
Mhm.
around middle school because that's where everything starts to happen. But like you just said, the giving the tools and the resources to the parents to be able to model that behavior for their kids, but also have somebody to listen to them so that they can listen to their kids, that is probably much more beneficial than actually working with the kids themselves.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%.
So, over time, as you were working with youth and then you transferred more to parents, and I know that you also really work with couples more specifically.
Mhm.
How, I mean, I don't know what the best question is here, but um, what does that look like as you are working with these couples now specifically?
Yeah, great question. So most couples who come to me for help, very much are wanting support. They love each other. They don't want to hurt each other. Very few people do, by the way, in my opinion. But when you're in a relationship, when you're in love, you do hurt your partner's feelings at times, and your partner will hurt your feelings at times. And a lot of what I do is, first off, normalize that that's part of what happens, and it doesn't mean that you're in an abusive relationship. Obviously, if you like, there are criteria for that, and we can share the link of how to get help if you are in an abusive relationship. But a lot of times it's not that. It's maybe that you're saying something that you don't mean when you're upset. And your partner then responds to you in a way that escalates the situation. And it's a very classic attack, defend cycle, right? Where I'm not intending to attack you. I'm intending to tell you that I have a need that's not being met, that's really important to me. And I'm speaking up for myself. I'm speaking my truth, which is important to do, right? But if I wait too long to speak up and tell you my needs, then what happens is it comes out wonky. It comes out like with a tone and not necessarily respectfully, because I've maybe been sitting on it and sitting on it. And every time that thing happens, it just like, it's exponentially bigger, right? So generally that's what happens in the tone. So partner one is like, has something that's really important that they want to talk about. And they say it in a way, they wait too long, it comes out and with a tone. And then partner B feels hurt, doesn't want their partner angry at them. Partner B feels like, wait, what on earth why are you attacking me? Like, I am a great person. Like, look, I mowed the lawn and, I gave you a great hug and we had a great night last night. And so they feel sort of like, wait, what's going on? Which then can escalate very quickly into getting very defensive, right? And trying to convince their partner, I didn't do the thing that you're accusing me of. Here's what it is. It's all a big misunderstanding. But that defensiveness then lands on partner A as if they're dismissing their needs. You don't take me seriously. And the next thing you know, you're off to the races. Both the criticism and the defensiveness escalate. So a lot of what I do, and that's just one example, but it's it's the most common communication problem is the attack defend, or in Gottman language, it's criticism and defensiveness. And I can tell you a little bit more about Gottman in a minute, but so what I do as a therapist is I give each couple tools. Okay, you have a really important need. You want to tell your partner that your feelings were hurt. Oops, should I keep talking?
Yeah.
So you want to tell your partner that your feelings are hurt, and then when you go to tell them, I help the couple find the language for how they start that conversation so that it is basically coming across in a thoughtful, respectful manner and using language that is crafted instead of just spontaneous speaking out of anger.
Gotcha.
And then I'll also coach partner B in how to respond when they are feeling criticized, so that instead of getting defensiveness, they're trying to say, okay, let me take a kernel of responsibility. What did I do that made you feel that way? I must have done something. Otherwise, it would not have landed the way that it did.
Yeah, I mean, that cycle is something that it's hard to break the habits of getting really defensive when, or like, what is the word but the tone, like you assume that it's a certain tone, but maybe it's not actually their intention. And then you react to that tone because you think that it's this way, but really they meant it another way. And then you just get in this cycle. And so I hear exactly what you're saying is the ability to not or break that cycle once you're in it. Yep. And the only thing that I have really heard in the past is it about me or is it about them? Like, is the tone necessarily directed towards me, or is it something that maybe is going on with them that has nothing to do with me? And so I can either accept it and say, hey, maybe it is about me. How can I change that thing about me, or learn a little bit more? Or is it about them and I can just let it go? But that's sometimes hard to do, especially in relationships and being with somebody all the time.
Sure. No, that's really well said. And I honestly think that most of the time it's partly about you and it's partly not. So it's like, on the one hand, if they're upset at you, like, there's probably something that you didn't do 100% perfectly. Now, are they overreacting? Maybe. And are they overreacting because they're hungry and tired, or there's a trigger from their past? Maybe that's on them to work on their part. But if I'm working on my part and you're working on your part, then both parties are working to try to communicate better and be more, have more productive conversations.
Yeah. I mean, and that goes across all relationships, not necessarily an intimate relationship, but I think across all relationships is how can we have better communication? And that's why I love the show, because really we can have these types of conversations and
Yeah.
get down to that nitty gritty of what does it look like for you? What does it look like for them? And how can we just get better on both, from both parties, really, with communication in general.
That is so true. And it expands so much wider than just our romantic relationship, because it's how do we talk about differences? And that's why your podcast is amazing, right? Like you're bringing on people, having interesting conversations. I'm sure you have comments, and then people are like having dialogues. You're thinking about it. They go home and they're like, oh my gosh, I just listened to this podcast. What do you think? And I am of the firm belief that that all people have valuable things to say and are worthy of being listened to, even when we disagree with them, even if, we think that their sources are not, the right sources for them to be listening to and quoting, right? If we can talk about differences in a way that we're doing so respectfully, that's how we learn and grow. So conflict is not bad. Like, people think conflict is bad, but conflict is good. Like, if you just only talk to people that agree with you, like, you're not going to learn anything new. You're never going to have a different way to look at the world, which I think in concept is pretty common sense. I think most people would agree with that. But day to day, that's the challenge, right? How do we actually put that to practice with how we talk to our loved ones, children, mentors, and then people that we are buying shampoo from at CVS, everybody, right?
Yeah. I think that's also interesting what you just said, is conflict is good. And in my eyes, in the past, I was like, no way, I would go around it at any
Yeah.
way that I possibly could. And I know as a leader in a corporation, I was more in that I wanted to help people. I didn't want that conflict. And
Right.
finally, I got to a place that I had a couple people on my team that I had to have those conversations with. And at that moment, when I was able to step in and not react to whatever was coming up and just have an open dialogue back and forth, that felt really powerful to me and made me much more confident in myself, of being able to have the emotions come up, like that the you want to fight, but it's like, hey, let me take a step back and actually listen to what they're saying versus taking it personal, and then have that dialogue back and forth versus just getting defensive and walking away, which was something
Yep.
that I used to do all the time. And
Sure.
ever since, really, those were the conversations that I had to have. I was like, wow, it feels so much better after you have the conflict happen, you work through it, and then move through it. And that, it has
Mhm.
been really interesting for me, of how I have personally shifted in
Yeah.
conversations that I have. So
Yeah, I'm so glad you're sharing that, because I think everybody can relate to not wanting to walk toward something that feels like it's going to be unpleasant, or feelings are going to get hurt. So it's really tempting to walk away from it, to try to avoid it or redirect it, or, not quote unquote create drama. Um, and so it's hard, because I think if we, like, I understand the impulse to do it, especially if somebody's mad at you, like, they're mad. It feels horrible when somebody's angry at you, or in a corporate situation, if you've let somebody down at work, nobody wants, it's that ick factor that you get in your stomach that nobody wants to feel. But if you do, like, walk toward it instead of away from it, then your hands on the steering wheel. You're deciding how the conversation happens. You're having the opportunity to really think about what you want to say and how you want to say it, as opposed to like, if you sit on it or like brush it under the carpet. I know for me, it'll come out on my face. Like I wear my heart on my sleeve. So if I'm unhappy, like, and then I get really embarrassed of like, people can tell I'm having a reaction to something, and it's like, but it will pop out. It pops out sideways if you don't address it. And that's just the way it's going to happen. I don't think that we can avoid that 100%, but we can do our best, I guess.
Yeah, I am also one of those people that I've been told my face does funny things when when I don't like I was brought to my attention that if I'm doing something and somebody came up to me and started talking, like they saw it on my face right away. So I finally got to a place that I was like, hey, let me finish doing what I'm doing. And once I am done, I'll shift my focus to you so that
Yeah.
you know I'm actually listening, because otherwise I do the like mommy, like I'm not listening thing and my face does funny things. So yeah, definitely. I am one of those people also. What I would love to do, so we're going to take a quick break. Well, we're going to do a commercial break really super quick. And then what I would love to do is after we come back from that, just talk a little bit more in depth. Maybe we can, I have a couple of scenarios that I'm curious about. And so maybe we can talk about those after. So we'll be right back. All right. So if you are just joining us, my guest Laura and I are talking about relationships and not necessarily just couples, but also counseling and therapy and how we can have these conversations really in whatever relationship that we have, and being able to even have the tough conversations, which we were just talking about, is really, really important. We don't want to avoid conflict. We actually want to move towards conflict to be able to resolve it, instead of what so many of us try to do is go around it or shove it down. And then usually at that time, it just explodes in other forms. So, what I would love to talk about, and I'm just curious if you do have a relationship, like an intimate relationship, that one of the partners is very much a communicator, the other one is not a communicator, and generally shuts down the conversation before the conversation can even happen, but then tends to come back and want to have that conversation after it's kind of passed. Like in those type of instances, when you feel like you're getting shut down consistently and the conversations don't really fully ever happen, or you can't really engage in them, what would be, advice in those type of situations?
Yeah, that is such a common issue. And I'm really glad that you're bringing that up, because usually, and you can't, I would say 9 times out of 10, there's one person in the relationship that wants to keep talking when something gets tense, and there's another person that wants a break and they want distance. And oftentimes it's hard for each person to understand the intention that the other person has. Okay. So if there's a person, if there's a topic, usually somebody doesn't just shut down for no reason, right? It's not usually because you're talking about going to a barbecue. Usually the shutdown is happening because there's an internal intense reaction that's overwhelming to somebody. So we know from the research when somebody shuts down, and John Gottman, who's a famous researcher, he's able to predict divorce with 90% accuracy. And what he found in his research is that when one partner is shutting down in a conversation, it looks as if they don't care, because on their outside expression, they look completely indifferent. Okay. But he's also taking their heart rate and has their pulse and their heart rate and measuring how much they move, and anxiety and stress hormone in terms of blood samples and urine samples. So you've got high levels of cortisol. Even though they look indifferent, when somebody's emotionally shut down, they're not, right? 9 times out of 10, inside, their heart rate is well over 100. They're freaking out. And in my office, I can eventually unpack it and understand what's happening. And that person who's shutting down will probably say, I didn't know what to say. I was afraid I was going to make it worse. So I just basically decided that I would hope the whole thing will just go away and I'll be quiet. And so while it looks indifferent, internally they're upset, but the other partner doesn't know that, right? So what happens to the other partner? They start knocking on the door even louder, right? Because the more you feel like this person doesn't care about me, they're not talking to me, they're just saying nothing, or they're saying things like, fine. They're saying things like, no, I'm not mad, I'm not upset. They're just basically kind of trying to decrease the intensity in the room, but it lands on the other person as if they're dismissing them, shutting them down, making them feel like their feelings aren't important. So then what happens behaviorally is that other partner then gets even more intensified and maybe wants to kind of keep talking. They start to speak. We know from the research, right? They start to speak a little faster. They have more energy. Their affect goes up. Their facial expressions become more animated. So the degree to which that partner is escalating, the other partner is like, oh boy, I need to back off, right? So one person's coming forward, the other person is going backwards. So what do? You have to take a break in that situation. If you don't take a break, what happens is people end up doing and saying things they regret. Okay. Because you're in a fight-flight system at that point. So what the person who's shut down is if you think about an opossum playing dead, they're in freeze. Right. And so the other person is probably in fight or eventually flight, where one person will kind of run away or say, I'm not dealing with this, maybe hang up a phone. So what I help couples do in that situation is take a time out where they have to agree to come back. And that goes back to what you were saying, Kelli, around okay, one person shuts down, they don't want to talk, but then what happens, right? So if partner A gives partner B a break, great. They have a break, the person who is shut down feels better because their heart rate's coming down and they don't ever want to deal with it again. So both people have to give the other person what they want a little bit. So partner A gives the 20-minute break. Both people use that 20 minutes to self-soothe. Let your heart rate come down. Take a shower. Take the dog for a walk. But what you don't do is obsess about the conversation. Oh my gosh, when we come back, I'm going to say this, this, and this. And I can't believe they said that to me. Da, da, da. That I'll really show them, right? Or definitely don't get on the phone and start calling your girlfriends and being you know what? He just said to me this, this, and this. No. Your break has to be self-soothing. Your partner's break has to be self-soothing. So whoever's shutting down, or whichever partner you are, and we've all been both, right? Whoever's shutting down, then they're also self-soothing for that 20 minutes. And then a timer goes off, whether it's an Alexa app or whether it's some phone, 20 minutes, you have to come back and then you reassess. Hey, can we try to have this conversation better? Can we try to talk in a way that we're both listening to each other? And whoever's more animated, they're going to need to work really hard to give the other partner space. And the person who shut down, they're going to have to work more to be proactive in saying things, even though they might want the conversation to end. So
Mm.
I don't know if that's like way too much. I just crammed like a kind of 20-minute process into whatever that just took me. But does that make sense, or does that sound really unrealistic from where you're sitting?
Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. I like what you said is actually set a timer so you both know there's this time we're going to come back and we're going to try to have this conversation in a more productive way, which I think is great wording to use versus that I'm going to get him here, get him there, or, those words that you want to use. But I also like how you said that both need to be self-soothing. It
Yes.
can't be the person that's overly animated being like build, 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 and this person is like self-soothing so that once you come at it, mom's like like attacking each other again.
Yeah.
So no, I think that made a lot of sense. And also what the question that popped up into my head is what about and I'm looking at this kind of more at youth also, is when you have the conversations with them and it seems like literally the lights are out, like there's somebody
Mhm.
who shuts down completely, that there's
Yeah.
just nothing
Yeah.
there to be able to have the conversation. Like in those, when you do take the break
Yeah.
and you come back and talk, but they're still not willing to, and both adults or youth, they're not really willing to have that conversation. And it almost feels like they're, it's blank in a way. How would
Mhm.
you go about, maybe they self-soothed a little too much? How would you have that conversation in that instance?
I would ask questions, right? So, and I have to work really hard on this because I'm very high energy, and so I have to work really hard to match energy when people are feeling like I don't get overwhelmed by intense emotions, but I get very triggered when people aren't sharing with me, right? That's just my love language or whatever word you want to use, right? So for me, I work really hard on like how hard it is when somebody's not talking to me is really, really hard. Like people tell me their secrets for a living. Like I like it when people talk to me. So so I have to really, really be curious. Um, if one of my kids, say for example, is not talking, I'm gonna have to find a creative way to not have it be my agenda to quote unquote get them to talk, but to like meet them where they're at and to be like, hey, like I love you, I care about you. It looks like you don't want to talk to me right now. I'm wondering what you need. I'm here. I love you. If you can tell me, great. If you can't tell me right now, that's okay too. Um, because it's not going to work to just try to up the ante and think, okay, that 20-minute break was sort of an agenda to get you to do something that you're not comfortable doing yet. If they're not ready to talk to me about certain things, I want them to come talk to me when they're ready. I don't want to force them to.
Yeah, that's really great also. And asking the question of, I wonder like what you need right now instead of having an agenda. And I know, I mean, I have a almost 8-year-old, and oftentimes he runs away and shuts down and will be able to somewhat express, but he still doesn't quite know what all the emotions are. And
Mhm.
sometimes for me, that's hard because I'm like, well, are you feeling sad? Are you feeling mad? Are you
Yeah.
like, I'm going through all the emotions trying to get him to attach it to something. And and now that you say that, I'm like, maybe I don't need to. Maybe it's more of, do you know what you need? And
Yeah.
most likely it's going to be no. But let that go. Like maybe that's enough for them at that moment. So I love how you said that.
Yeah, it's very different, right? To talk to a child, sort of you're the one that's sort of the person who is gonna put your own needs aside for the parenting moment in that situation, which is a little bit different than when you've got 2 adults in a difference of opinion. But with a child, I think that is a win to have them be able to say that they don't know and they can't talk about it right then and there, even if they can't choose a feeling, because these things don't happen in one conversation, right? Then you've invited them, oh, you're having a feeling. You might not know what it is, but then that was a moment of education that you had with your child that they thought about, and even they spent some brain space thinking about, do I feel sad even if I can't identify what it is? So I think that's a win. I really do. Just in showing a kid that you care about them and you want to know what's up. That's the goal in that situation, not quote unquote forcing them, getting them to talk.
Yeah. And what about, so another situation that kind of pops in my head is, what about the people that, so it's like they are talking, and you never get a chance to talk otherwise. And it's full agenda for them as to where they're trying to get. And then when you come back and say something, what's the right, like, it's more of like that negative, like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. This is how you should do it. And I'm thinking, kind of like older generation tends to have the way of, well, what I say you do, versus like the don't do as I say what I do kind of attitude. So when you get into a relationship with somebody that kind of has that type of attitude, what would you say in those type of cases, if that made sense?
No, absolutely. Just to clarify, do you mean a parent-child relationship as a parent, or do you mean you're in a romantic relationship with somebody who has had a different who's had a different kind of upbringing as you have?
Yeah, I would say probably like a romantic relationship that has a different, so it's more of the like, do as I say, not as I do. And it's more of the, I'm going to tell you what to do in the conversation versus actually having a conversation.
Right. So
like one-sided conversations, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yep. So if I had that couple in my office, right, then what I would be doing is really breaking that conversation down into much shorter bits where it's dialectical. So both people are talking to each other instead of one person talking and then the other person. And sometimes, so in a situation like that, if somebody feels that the other person is just monologuing, and when they try to come in, they're being told that do as I say, not as I do, or whatever. That's actually quite concerning. I wouldn't, like, if that's happening in a relationship where you don't where you have somebody that's not even allowing you to speak, that's one of those situations I would be like, you know what, you might want to consider getting a licensed professional to help you out with that dynamic. If it's during non-conflict. If it's during conflict, then I wouldn't be so concerned, right? Because if you're in a relationship where one person's kind of told, like, do what I say and don't speak back, that's bordering on an abusive relationship. Or it is an abusive relationship. I wouldn't diagnose any relationship without talking to both parties, doing a full assessment, but it would be concerning to me, suffice to say. But in conflict, like we said before, sometimes we do or say things that are like not who we naturally are or who we want to be as our best selves, right? So sometimes it's kind of like, let me finish my sentence. Oh my gosh, I saw a funny it was some movie or something, where somebody was like, let me just finish this paragraph first.
Right. Let me finish writing my book. Hold on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. When you're in the middle of a conversation, it's like, I get that impulse. Like, I have a lot to say here, and you are going to be my audience, and you are going to hear this out. No, that doesn't fly, right? That's not an equal, balanced relationship where both people are speaking and listening. So I would say that that if they were in my office, I would be having one person kind of say, this is my feeling. This is my opinion. And then I would say, okay, I'm just going to have you pause and we're going to turn to your partner. And your partner, what do you hear? What do you hear so far? And if the person's like, wait, I'm not done yet, then what I'll do is I'll explain. The thing is that if you say too much at once, you're going to lose your partner, because there's no way they're going to be able to keep up with everything. And what you're saying is really, really important, but we don't want any of it to get lost. And we want to make sure that this is a conversation, not a monologue. And so I get, as a couples therapist, I have that sort of ability because they've already agreed that I am sort of the one that they're reaching out to for help. So when I give that kind of coaching, it's like, it helps, because then you're like, oh yeah, that does make sense. Of course, I want to hear what my partner has to say. And so then the partner would then validate what they heard the other person say first, and then bring in their difference. And that way, and that's a constant thing that I'm constantly doing in my office, where I'm letting you, Kelli, know that you heard what I said as I intended it. And then you're listening to me and making sure that you've heard what I intended to say. So it's a little bit tedious because it's slow. I really, really slow conversations down.
I do. I mean, a lot of that is so important too, is we want to have the dialogue and not the monologue, and slowing it down, I think, even can translate into the parent relationship also. Is how can you have the dialogue versus the monologue? And so in my brain, it kind of went in both spaces of, it could be an intimate relationship or a relationship in general, but then also that parent and child relationship, in the same way of, even though you're having a disagreement or conflict or whatever it might be, it's still important to slow down the conversation to be able to really hear each other. And so that we get those little chunk sizes versus the full, as I call it, verbal vomit that oftentimes happens in conflict. So
yeah. And sometimes people just want to keep the floor. So there's filibustering going on.
Yeah. You're like, this is my time. I'm taking it. No, I think all of those are really great points. And I do want to kind of circle back a little bit to what we were talking about, is that like borderline could be an abusive relationship, because as with my nonprofit, it really is in that mental health space. And so I'm curious around that. How would somebody that maybe is in a relationship that is kind of borderline, or how do they know the difference between healthy versus not healthy, I guess, is the question.
Wow, is that an important question? Right. And so if you believe that you might be in an abusive relationship, hands down, like, get some help with that externally, right? So I wouldn't want to go on a podcast and give some bullet list, and then somebody out there like is like taking notes and then kind of trying to diagnose that within themselves, right? I feel that the most ethical thing for me to say in response to that is just like, get some support, reach out for help. Don't be afraid to call a hotline. If you think you're in an abusive relationship, that is something to take incredibly seriously, and don't minimize your concerns. Don't tell yourself that you don't count, or that you're not going to make the phone call because everybody else on the other side of the world has worse problems than you. Like, what I would say is get the help and ask for it. And that doesn't mean that you're committing to like leaving the relationship. It just means that you're committing to getting some support to make some decisions about exactly that question that you're asking, Kelli, of like, what kind of things should I look out for? What kind of, and to have somebody who's trained in assessing for this.
Yeah. No, and I think that's really important just to hear in itself, is that if you have any feelings that come up around the possibility of being in a abusive relationship or what that looks like, definitely reach out to somebody and ask for help, because you don't know. And maybe it's more maybe it's a miscommunication. Maybe it is more towards abuse or a domestic violence or whatever that looks like. So reaching out for help and finding somebody who is a professional, licensed, trained in that space to be able to help sort through what's going on. But I love, and I could talk to you about this like forever, but we're getting close to our hour. So I am curious, for those people that want to really have open dialogue and conversation with their spouse, they really want to have this happy space in their relationship. Do you have any, I mean, you already gave us like lots of tips around that, but any tips or tricks that you want to share as related?
Sure. Well, I do want to show you my books, right? So this is the book for one person to read on their own. So this is called Love is an Action Verb. And this is something that you can read by yourself or together with your partner. And it has all the details. I have just all the normal things to expect in a relationship. A lot of it is about kind of making sure that you're not, that you're knowing what the problem is and clear about your goals before you jump in and try to fix them. And also focusing on positivity is like huge, because when we focus on positivity and generosity and gratitude, everybody's happier. So there's that. And then there's this one, which is the workbook. And so this has like everything in it about like just sort of I detail the different dialogues and the there's like basically conversation starters. So what I have tried to do is basically take couples therapy out of the office and say, okay, here's what I would do if I was sitting there watching your conversation. So I write down, okay, like ask your partner this question, and then they take notes, and then your partner like answers the question, and both of you are like self-reflecting. Okay, this is what I feel like, maybe my conflict style. Okay, I tend to have more of a conflict avoidant conflict style. And then you're having it, and then your partner's like, oh, really? I took Laura's quiz and it says that I have, more of a validating conflict style. Oh, okay. So then what you're doing is you're talking about the meta instead of like getting into it from the weeds. You're like trying to say, oh, okay, isn't this interesting? Like we're looking at our relationship from the outside. So anyway, there's that. And then I also have a free empathy course. So if people don't want to spend a single cent, they can go and it's called Empathy Made Easy. And we can add a link somewhere so that you can just by yourself practice. How do you empathize? It's the single most important communication skill that exists, is empathy. The ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes, but almost so much that you don't even have shoes, right? You're not thinking about yourself. You're like, the world stops because you're so focused on your partner when they're upset, when they're in pain, how you can show them that they matter to you. And if everybody's working on empathy, boy, we'd be in a better place right now. Yeah. As a world, as a society, in our homes, in our workplaces.
I love that. I mean, one, I love your book and your workbook, because if somebody has maybe a spouse that doesn't want to go into counseling, right? The stigma behind therapy and counseling and couple counseling, you can go buy your book and the workbook and take that home and be like, hey, I was wondering if this is something that you would like to try. And then maybe that will also lead you in the direction of being able to actually go and see a counselor or a therapist at a later time, if that's something that you need. And this, so Empathy Made Easy, is that the right one?
It's not as like a website, but if you go to laurasilverstein.co, you'll find a trillion different free resources. I got little workbooks, I've got worksheets, I've got like date night planners. I'm at this point in my life, I'm giving away everything that is, pretty I don't know. It's expensive to go to couples therapy. So I'm really, the social worker in me is just trying to make it free, or like, what you can get in a $22 book instead of a, couples therapy session that I won't tell you how much that costs because it's super expensive.
But to have a happy and healthy relationship, I feel like there's no price really for that.
Yes.
So,
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you. Right. And yes. And I am all for therapy, especially if you're dealing with like betrayal, or if you're dealing with addiction, if you're dealing with, major mental illness. There's things that you just cannot do in a workbook. And that's a face-to-face, get a full assessment. And I agree with you. And a lot of us give sliding scales for people if it's prohibitive, if the money's prohibitive. So thanks for adding that too.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, for me, if I, was in that place, it would be priceless to really have a happy and healthy relationship. And so here is Laura's link one more time.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
Kelli.
I am so grateful for you coming on and sharing all the things that you did. So thank you so much for being here.
This was so much fun. And again, I just appreciate what you're doing, raising awareness about mental issues so that we all understand that this is just something that every single person in the world, has times where we just need a little more support and to take the stigma out of it. And I love what you're doing and so glad I got to meet you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, y'all. That was another amazing episode of Make Mental Health Matter. Again, I go live on Mondays at 11 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. And then we also have the next show coming up this Wednesday at 7 p.m. And that is really centered around stories, whatever somebody went through into that hope piece. And I hope that you take away some of those amazing things that Laura shared. Empathy is huge. Empathy for each other and teaching that skill. It's a skill. It really is a skill that you can learn, and being empathetic towards others, but also how do we create these conversations? How do we have these dialogues that are healthy and in a productive way versus just that one side talker or the talk and shut down or whatever that looks like, right? There's so many different instances as related to relationships. So if it is something that you're needing extra support, or you want to go look at Laura's website and get some of those tools off of her website that she just said was available, please go check that out. But either way, thank you so much for watching, and make sure, again, you mash down that subscribe button or add us to your favorites list so that you don't miss another episode. And I will see you on Wednesday. Bye, y'all.
Hi, I'm Amy Joy, and I'm the host of Get Your Together Live with Amy Joy. And you can catch me every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific on the amazing Trajectory channel right here on E360 TV.